What's going on, everyone? So today we're going to talk about a card partially due to the mono blue Iden list that has risen in value over 800% since its release. Of course, well, since any card has been released officially in Star Wars Unlimited. This one is a little bit unique as it's really symptomatic of the hard control decks becoming more and more meta, and we've talked about a few cards like that that have just risen in value because of the hard control meta. If you want to pick up the card that I'm talking about today, or any of the cards that we're going to talk about today, be sure to use my link on TCG Player, or a link down below to TCG Player. It's going to help you out a little bit as well as help me out. But without further ado, let's talk about Spark of Rebellion. This is the card that has risen so much in value, and I had to pull from my bulk rares collection. I sort all my cards in a big box down here, and well, Spark of Rebellion initially kind of just went into the pile of all the cards that could just sit there until, you know, at one point they rise in value, and that was, well, very recently. If we look back at the price, even over the past month, even a month into the set's release, you could see this is hovering around $2. Back when, you know, the set was released, it was $1. March 8th is when the set officially released. You could see the initial price, but you know, this is kind of just everyone rising. All the cards were extremely expensive before the game was actually released, but on March 8th, that's when the game was released, and well, you could see the price sitting at around $1, even dropping to below $1 for some time. And since then, you could see it's had a gradual increase. Now, part of this is due simply because of not enough supply for all these cards. And then you start hitting around mid-April when we started to see Vader Blue come into the fray. We started to see Double Blue Iden. We started to see these hard control decks. You can see the price of this card has just risen and risen and risen all the way up to almost $9 at this point. If you were to compare this to a very, very popular rare, by the way, Spark Rebellion is a rare, such as K2SO that has consistently seen a ton of play, you could see that, well, it was at $15 about a month ago, and then as hard control lists got more and more popular, you see the price of something like K2SOs dropped a little bit down to $11. But even the day after, you know, when you're seeing like March 9th, when the set's released, similar to, you know, when we were talking about Spark Rebellion and when it was sitting at $1, K2 has consistently hovered anywhere from $8 to $9 to $15. It's hovered around that price, and it hasn't really fluctuated and jumped a ton compared to something like Spark Rebellion. And this is extremely symptomatic due to the hard controlled meta. Now, I've talked about this and referred to it multiple times in this video already, but what am I talking about in specific? Well, Spark Rebellion, not just the set, but the card, is specifically meant to deal with the hard control mirror matchup. It is the card that gives you an edge alongside Restock and Vigilance, which basically every single hard control deck is running Vigilance, and then they're usually running 1 to 2 copies of Restock. The way you beat those cards is Spark of Rebellion. And the other day I made my Boba Blue video and talked about Boba Blue, and I talked about how to get an edge on those control mirrors, and Spark of Rebellion from the sideboard usually is the way to do it. But this card isn't just a sideboard card. There are some lists, such as I mentioned earlier, the mono blue Iden, the double blue Iden that we saw win the Richmond 4K from Sauce. This guy decided to run 3 copies of Spark Rebellion main deck, double off aspect. This card is so powerful in the control mirror that you are able to run it not only for a single off aspect similar to Vigilance, where it's costing 2 extra, but even in decks where it costs 4 extra, because it is the way to get around the Restock Vigilance recurring issue that you have to deal with in the control mirror. If you're fighting against an aggro matchup, like let's say Sabine Red or Sabine Yellow or Boba Yellow, Spark Rebellion looks absolute garbage, right? In some cases, it might do something, but you don't want to be playing a 6-costed event that's going to pull 1 card out of your opponent's hand rather than dealing with your opponent's board. This is not what that is for. And don't look at it as a card that you could play in any matchup and get a lot of value out of it. As long as you're running it single aspect, you might get some more value, but double off aspect, it is not something that you're really looking to have in your hand unless it's the control mirror. And the same thing applies when I'm running Vader Blue. I've done the same thing where I run triple Spark of Rebellion, either one main deck, two side, or two main, one side. I haven't run the full three of it in the main deck, as I generally leave it to the sideboard because of the mix of those two allows me to have a nice little matchup against all the decks, a little bit more well-rounded. But of course, Iden Blue, when you're running double blue, you have a little bit of a limited card selection, and so running the 3 copies main deck makes a lot of sense. The nice thing about this is if you are able to run it, let's say, in your control decks, but run it for only a single off aspect, then it becomes even more valuable, such as the Boba Blue deck I talked about earlier. But that isn't all. You even are seeing, if we go to the hot decks list, we're seeing a lot of yellow Sabine kind of taking over a lot of people's preferences for a Sabine deck. And usually you're going to find triple Spark Rebellion main deck in order to deal with the crucial turns that control decks have. If you're fighting against, Iden Blue, you could drop a Spark Rebellion on turn 3, the turn that Sabine's supposed to come down, and then potentially take away their vigilance, right? If you're fighting against any control deck and they're running blue, maybe you put this on turn 7, right? When you're expecting a Super Laser Blast. That's how they're supposed to, kind of recuperate their extreme pressure. They wipe the board. Well, you could save this for turn 7, hit it, and then they were planning around having this big board wipe, and then you just remove it from their hand. Or you could even do something as simple as do this on turn 3 to take their Child Sin out of hand. So maybe they skip the play in order to set up a 6/6 Sentinel Child Sin, which you just then pull from their hand, which might just mess up their future couple of plays. The Spark of Rebellion has become more and more important, not only for the decks that are in the control mirror, but also the decks that are fighting the control decks, because all of the control decks have usually a specific plan based around whatever resource they have, and there are a few key turns. Similar to, Boba Flip Turn. We talk about this a lot when we consider the Boba meta over the past month or so, or 2 months, where Spark Rebellion can be really advantageous against the Boba Flip Turn as well, where, turn 4, just before they start doing anything, you play your Spark Rebellion. Maybe you rip one of their removal spells from hand, and no longer can they leverage an additional 3 resource on the Boba Flip Turn. Or maybe, you're playing Sabine and you are worried about the Steadfast Battalion. Or maybe you're playing the control deck and you're worried about Steadfast Battalion coming down and wrecking your Child Sin, or whatever it is. There are key turns for every single deck, mostly for control decks that you have to consider, but even for like the meta Boba deck, the Boba Flip Turn can be really easily disrupted through just one Spark Rebellion. The control decks can be very easily disrupted by taking their Vigilances, taking their Super Laser Blast, taking their Child Sin, and then the rest of the deck, the rest of the matchup gets a lot easier when you do these very crucial disruptive options. I've seen them commonly in the main deck at this point, in the Han decks, in the Sabine decks. It's starting to become a staple of the entire format. And while I do think it is mainly from the control decks, it is also rising in price because the aggro decks want to use it against the control decks, just as the control decks want to use it against the control decks. It's basically like the key card when you're considering the matchups against those really hard controls. Taking those key cards really change the game. And I think partially, even though it is one of the ways to counter control extremely well, it's also partially due to us not having an extreme depth of extremely powerful cards. Like, there are just some cards that you're playing that aren't like amazing, but just serviceable for their role. Things like Make an Opening have oftentimes very few targets, and you're using it just because of a little bit of a mini heal and another removal spell. Maybe when we get the next set, we're going to find that Spark Rebellion isn't as crucial to your game plan in a lot of situations, because you have more cards that your opponents have to deal with, and there isn't just like one card you can take from their hand to disrupt their entire plans, such as Restock, such as Super Laser Blast, such as Child Sin. These are really key ones. So if you have any Spark Rebellions in your collection, you might have been sitting on them, you're like, this card's like whatever, like it's decent, I don't mind it. Well, it has certainly risen in value as we have evolved the meta. And this is one of the things that I love about these card games is, yeah, the meta stays somewhat the same in that Boba Green Sabine green. These are still top of the meta decks, but now we're starting to see Iden blue, Vader blue, Boba blue, Sabine yellow. Even Han green is considered one of the more meta decks at this point because of all these different things shifting within the meta. And as we get a little bit more of the meta developed and more options available, well, other options become more viable because of the way they interact with those options, which is really, really sweet. So just a little bit of a quick one here to let you know about a card that you might have been sleeping on. And I gotta pull the other copies out of my collection, as I already pulled 2 of them, but I realized I had a third one sitting in my box, so I gotta go pull that one out and add it to kind of the important rares. I separate them. I have like a binder full of the cards that are worth something, and then the box full of just bulk. But gotta go out and make sure you take it out of your bulk box. Thanks for watching, everyone. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Have you been using Spark Rebellion lately? You'll be a believer when you use it against those control decks. Trust me. I'll see you all for the next one.